When the Russian aggression started on the 24th of February this year, we had more than 28,000 students studying in Ukraine in different universities and institutes. Then we had more than 8,500 Nigerian students. So Nigerian student community is the second largest one in Ukraine.
Good evening, Mr. Maxim Subkh.
Good evening.
Welcome to Nigeria. Is this your first time here?
Yeah, it's my first time. Thank you. Thank you for the hospitality. Amazing country. Thank you so much.
How much have you seen so far?
Well, I have seen a couple of places, but what I've seen is very amazing and really wonderful nature, wonderful people. So thank you.
Well, welcome again. And I'll just quickly dive into asking why you are in Nigeria at this very particular time, bearing in mind what's going on in your home country, and then you have to do these trips as part of your responsibility. So why are you here?
Well, first of all, thank you for hosting me here in Nigeria. Definitely Nigeria is considered to be one of our most important partners in Africa for Ukraine. You know that I've been on a tour with my Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Dmytro Kuleba. And we have started the tour on October the 2nd. Together with my minister, we visited 5 countries. Then I continued the tour, and I also visited 4 more countries. And actually, Nigeria comes in the very end of my tour, because we believe that we need to talk with our African friends, partners. It's very important to be here in Nigeria exactly because we now need to open a new page in our relationship. Yes, Ukraine now lives a very difficult moment. Ukraine now is under Russian aggression, as you know, since February. And this war has been waged on Ukraine without any reason. This war is completely unjust. It was unprovoked war, and now the Ukrainian people are fighting for their freedom, for for the right of existence. They are fighting for their land. You see how brave is the Ukrainian army, how many lands and territories we managed to regain from the Russian aggressor. So I am here just to say to our Nigerian brothers and sisters that we need the support of the whole international community. We need and we must deliver the truth. People across Africa and across the world must know what is happening in Ukraine, what are the real reasons and pretexts behind the Russian aggression and the occupation and the annexation of Ukraine's territories. That is the main goal, and of course also we'll be tackling with the representatives of the government of Nigeria the ways of enhancing bilateral relations in different spheres. Because, as I said, we're interested in developing trade and economic relationship, investments, cultural and humanitarian exchange, including the students, of course, which we'll be, I think, discussing in more details later.
Interesting. A lot of things you're in Nigeria for trade and education, but of priority to me is that of the students' education, because I've had to interface with them a lot, and I've had to write about their experiences the war is still ongoing, but after they had to evacuate from their various campuses in Ukraine and to find shelter elsewhere, is to ask what their fate is. A couple of Nigerian students in Ukraine. Also to just quickly say that we have quite a population of Nigerians schooling and studying in Ukraine as well. They have complained that they've had to pay, exorbitant prices to get their certificates or transcripts. But that of the transcripts is especially interesting because they have to write a letter of expulsion to get transcript from their school. So automatically you are asking them to exit from studies to get transcript? What's the rationale around that? Is it perhaps a bad use of language? Because here in Nigeria, once you hear expulsion, it means it's termination of study period. You're done studying. But of course, here in Nigeria as well, you can get your transcript at any point of study just to show your grades and every other thing. So why is it different in Ukraine?
Well, I would start with the simple fact that when the Russian aggression started on the 24th of February this year, we had more than 28,000 students studying in Ukraine in different universities and institutes. Then we had more than 8,500 Nigerian students. So Nigerian student community is the second largest one in Ukraine. So definitely now we are facing so many problems in providing those students who had to flee Ukraine with an opportunity to resume their study. That's why one of the options is the online study. I know that these days there is a representative from the Ministry of Education of Ukraine is commencing a visit to Nigeria. And the lady is about to deliver a very clear message how those students can resume and continue their study in Ukraine. There are several options actually, and we would also urge the government of Nigeria to recognize the online studying as a kind of type of a program which is accredited by the government of Ukraine, just to let those students complete their study process in Ukraine, and then probably when the situation gets calm and normalized, they will be able to be back to continue their study physically in Ukraine. Meanwhile, some of them are also able to get back to Ukraine and to enroll into the universities that are located in the western part of Ukraine, where the hostilities are not so severe, or sometimes even you don't see any hostilities there, despite, of course, the shellings that by the Russian army of the Ukrainian cities. And you know, there is absolutely no safe city or a safe place in Ukraine, because the shellings targeting all the cities everywhere, including the civil infrastructure, which poses a great threat for everybody, including foreign students. That's why we advise that those students continue their study online. And also tomorrow I'm going to deliver a very clear algorithm how Nigerian students can continue their study in Ukraine, and this algorithm has been adopted by the Ministry of Education of Ukraine, and I was asked to deliver this document to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Nigeria, as well as to the relevant authorities here in Nigeria, to advise them how to inform the students accordingly about the ways of and options of continuation of their study. And here also we have our embassy, which is also aware of that and has the necessary instructions how to deal with that issue. So I'm sure that everything will be sorted out very soon. And I also urge Nigerian students not to go to Russia to continue their study, because Russia was behind the abruption of their study. The Russian invasion is the main reason why they are here and why they had to stop and to halt their study in Ukraine. So it is both morally and it's a matter of moral values, I should say, before anything else. So we are trying our best. We even offered an option for those students who had to flee Ukraine to continue their study in some other countries, neighboring countries with Ukraine, as well as Georgia, for example, because we have bilateral treaties with Georgian universities, Hungarian, Romanian universities, where those students can continue their study in a way that after they finish their study, Ukraine will recognize their diplomas and their certificates.
Interesting. So when you say you advise Nigerian students not to move to Russia to continue their studies, does that mean you are aware of Nigerian students who are making that move?
Actually, there were offers coming out from the Russian side, attracting those who had to flee Ukraine to join Russian universities. But as far as I know, those offers were not free of charge, so students had to pay for that. That's the first thing. The second thing is that, as I mentioned, morally it would be incorrect to do so, because it's absolutely immoral to go to a country which was behind all those troubles that were created to the students. And I believe that really I know quite a lot of those African students who graduated and who had to leave Ukraine because of the war. They really became patriots of Ukraine. They really became patriots of their native country and Ukraine, and they clearly realize and understand what stands behind that aggression. And because, as I said at the very beginning, it was absolutely unjust, unfair, and unnecessary.
Interesting. So I'll just circle back to why you are in Nigeria and Africa at large. You talked about strengthening trade relations and other relations you want to build with the African continent, a new phase for your relationship with Africa. And that quickly brings me to what happened at the UN General Assembly 2 weeks ago, I think, when there was a vote against votes for concrete action against racism, racial discrimination, and other intolerance all over the world, and Ukraine voted against that concrete action. I mean, knowing full well that you are trying to build a relationship with Africa that has been on the front line. I don't have the statistic, but Africa is perhaps the continent that has suffered the most racism or racist acts all over the world. And if you're looking to build a partnership or a relationship with Africa, I would imagine that a diplomatic move would be to support that resolution or that call that was moved by Côte d'Ivoire. But we saw that Ukraine moved against that call. Why did that happen?
Actually, I have to clarify that we have a very close coordination between our permanent mission to the UN and all African representative offices in the United Nations. As I said, the government of President Zelensky and the Minister Kuleba, they are looking towards opening a new page with the African continent in the light of the Russian aggression. If you take a look at the latest UN resolution, which was voted and which was devoted to the condemnation of the Russian aggression and annexation of Ukrainian territories. So you will find that there is no African country which voted against. So we have a majority of countries voting for that resolution, which was brought up by Ukraine and several co-sponsors, and among them even several African countries were co-sponsors of that resolution, which is a big step forward that shows that Africa is getting more and more involved. It is really the more war continues in Ukraine, the more it becomes an eye-opener for the African continent. So I believe that we need closer cooperation and closer coordination between our sides. Also, I hope that my visit to Nigeria and the tour which was conducted by the minister and myself will help really to get our positions more close, not only just on the bilateral level, but also multilaterally. Regarding other resolutions, I should say that we need to communicate, we need to talk more. So Ukraine absolutely has nothing to do with racism. I would tell you why, because we in our parliament we have Afro-Ukrainian people, we have MPs who are from African descent. One of them was together with me yesterday in South Africa, and we were also conducting meetings explaining that this is the thing that you would never find in Russia, for example. So we believe that all people should live in freedom, should live in justice, and we have to coordinate our stances and positions on all the levels. So tomorrow I hope I will hold meetings in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We'll be talking about issues pertaining to our bilateral relations, including the diversification of our legal framework, because I think and I believe that we don't have enough documents and bilateral agreements signed until as of today, and I see that the potential of our bilateral relations is still untapped. Definitely we will be talking about the ways how to coordinate our positions under the umbrella of the United Nations, which is a matter of crucial importance. Also, I'll be having another meetings regarding the educational process and the things that I've mentioned already. So I hope that this short but very important visit will deliver a substantial progress in our bilateral relations.
So still on this UN resolution and Ukraine voting against concrete action, will be to ask that, do you not see that move as jeopardizing the reason for your trips to Africa?
Well, actually, generally, since we are we have applied for membership in the European Union. So mainly, Ukraine always coordinates and adheres to the position of the European Union countries. So we have to see, I mean, every issue has to be studied separately. So sometimes, as I said, before the war, the situation was completely different, and now under the Russian aggression, Ukraine is reviewing and revising its position towards many issues and many international problems. So I don't see that something is jeopardizing our visit to Africa, because we maintain a transparent, equal relations. Our cooperation is built on a win-win basis. That's why I think that if there is any issue that needs to be tackled, so that's the good opportunity for our countries and our peoples to negotiate, to open a dialogue, and I believe that only through dialogue our positions can get closer.
If I get you clearly, you're saying that the stance Ukraine took at that resolution was an EU stand.
Well, generally, you know, we have a long history of cooperation and coordinating our stances. So I wouldn't be paying so much attention to that resolution, because, you know, we have a history of votings for pro-African resolutions. Let's say Ukraine is the co-founder of the United Nations organization since 1945. Ukraine had an independent and separate seat in the United Nations since this organization was founded. Then Ukraine was one of the founders of the Committee for Fighting Apartheid and Racism. That was in the 20th century, but since the very beginning of the Ukraine's activity as a member of the United Nations, Ukraine always adhered to the UN Charter and international law and the relevant resolutions. Well, so I believe that Ukraine is a purely democratic state. Ukraine believes in the values that most of the humanity believe in and adheres to. That's why I firmly believe that we have a very, very bright future in Ukrainian-African relations.
Okay, I just really hope that that vote doesn't change a lot of things. And yeah, so moving on to my next question. Yesterday and within the week, we see that the UAE is facilitating some kind of peace conversations between Ukraine and Russia, and we saw a swap of prisoners between both countries. Does that look like a ray of sunshine and the end is near?
Actually, we are grateful to all our partners who are trying to do their best to facilitate, to put an end to this war and to put an end to the Russian aggression. From the very beginning, several countries, including Turkey and some Arab countries, they offered their good services, they offered their goodwill to bring the two parties together to put an end to the Russian aggression and to the war in Ukraine. Actually, mediation efforts of Turkey were very much successful. Turkey helped also to arrange and to sign the well-known grain deal, which facilitated in securing the food security of Africa, Asian countries, and Middle East, which was very important. Then the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia also was a part of a very important prisoners of war swap deal, which was also a success, and Ukraine managed to bring back quite a big number of prisoners. And now we have talks with the United Arab Emirates, since the Emirati president has visited Moscow before that, and we always ask our partners not to talk about Ukraine without Ukraine. So everything which has a relation or connection to Ukraine, we always urge our partners to discuss this issue with us directly. That's why I hope that the role which United Arab Emirates is about to play, or the mediation efforts that United Arab Emirates is going to introduce, will be beneficial for both sides. But unfortunately, we do not trust Russia, and we cannot trust Russia, because just one example: when the grain deal was signed on 22nd of July this year, on the next day, Russia bombarded some grain facilities in Odessa port with no reason for that. So now we are also aware about the possibility that Russia might refuse to extend the grain deal after the 22nd of November. So just to seize this opportunity, I would like also to call all our partners in Africa and in the Middle East to urge Russia to extend that deal, because Russia is using grain and foodstuff as a tool, as a weapon against many countries and many nations who are on the brink of a real hunger. And probably you know that a couple of weeks ago, President Zelensky signed a decree to donate up to 50,000 tons of grains to both Ethiopia and Somalia. And from the very beginning of the opening of the wheat or grain corridor, Ukraine has already dispatched about 1 million tons of grains towards Africa. So we are doing all possible to remain a trustworthy guarantor of food security of Africa and the world.
What sort of conditions can occasion a truce in the hostilities going on currently between Russia and Ukraine?
As President Zelensky said, Ukraine is not interested in a truce or something, or a peace that will be temporary. We need peace. We need a peace deal, but this peace can be reached only after Russia withdraws completely from the occupied territories of Ukraine. And President Zelensky warned President Putin many times that any new attempt of annexation of new territories from Ukraine will close the window of opportunities for a direct dialogue or peace talks between President Zelensky and Putin. And that's what's happened, really. Russia has annexed 2 more territories. Now we have more than 21% of Ukrainian territory under Russian occupation. So now we don't see that there is any possibility for both presidents to talk directly. So we will be continuing fighting, and we are getting a lot of support from our Western partners and the United States, including military one. So we are fighting, and we are making progress, and we are regaining considerable parts of our annexed territories, and we will continue that fight until Russia pulls out. And Russia is bearing huge losses, and the consequences are very dire for the Russian army and for the Russian economy. So we believe that with the political help of our partners across the world, together or combined with the military aid, Ukraine will be able not just only to stand, but also to liberate the whole Ukrainian territory. And Russia is going to compensate all those losses caused to Ukrainian economy and to the Ukraine as a state. Because we will not be looking just for international funds to cover all those losses. Russia has to be brought to justice and to be responsible for the damage that was caused by this unjust and unfair war against my country.
Is Ukraine, I mean, this is a question everyone wants answers to, and that is if Ukraine is likely to give up its NATO membership bid.
Well, it's a very important question. Thank you for asking me that question. Before 2014, Ukraine was keen on being neutral. 2014, as you remember, the Crimea was annexed, then parts of Donbass were also occupied by Russia. Since 2014, we decided to apply for a membership in the NATO. And this application, or this right to become a member in NATO, is enshrined in our constitution, both to the European integration and Euro-Atlantic integration. Both of them are in our constitution. So we never sought to be a part of any political or military bloc or alliance. But when Russia annexed our territories and Russia turned from a guarantor of Ukraine's security and territorial integrity into a violator of that territorial integrity. So we had nothing to do but to find a party or alliance that could secure and preserve Ukraine's integrity and independence. And we have to underline that NATO is a purely defensive bloc. So we believe that NATO is really able, once Ukraine is a part of that bloc, NATO will be able to protect Ukraine. And the President Zelensky, when the war started and the aggression of Russia began, President Zelensky said that the issue of Ukraine being a part of NATO or giving up its application to become a member of NATO is a discussable issue. It can be discussed. But when, as I mentioned, Russia annexed more territories, so membership of Ukraine in NATO became inevitable.
So that's now not negotiable. You can't negotiate that right now.
We have now to make Russia pull out of our lands. Once Russia withdraws, then other issues can be discussed. But we will never discuss anything under threats and ultimatums and under constant shellings of our cities.
Strengthening Nigeria's democracy, promoting our cultural practices, building our community through relevant and credible information. Log on to Premium Times on www.premiumtimesng.com. Breaking news and deep investigative stories from Nigeria.
Okay, so interesting that, Ukraine does not plan to be subdued or put under pressure to retain its NATO membership. And I find very interesting, given the annexation that happened in the 4 regions and how that happened with the referendum, that's what Russia called it. So right now, I want you to speak to me about the kamikaze drones. Iran, Russia, Ukraine. There's been a lot of conversation around that and how Ukraine is saying that Iran is complicit. It's an accomplice to Russia in destroying Ukraine. So what is that whole conversation?
Yeah, just mentioning the sham referenda that Russia has organized over the newly annexed Ukrainian territories. I'm grateful to Nigeria and to all other African countries which did not recognize them. And I'm sure that no country in the world will do because they were organized in a contradiction to the international law. And regarding the drone issues and drone supplies which are believed to be produced in Iran, so it is true, and it's really very alarming. And we had, after discovering that and after gathering more and more data and evidences, proving that Iran is really supplying those drones to Russia, and after that Russia is using those drones against Ukrainian objects and targets. Several weeks ago, Ukraine decided to expel the Iranian ambassador from Ukraine and also to decrease significantly the number of Iranian diplomats in Ukraine. We urged many times the Iranian side not to be a part of the Russian aggression against Ukraine. Now we consider Iran as an accomplice in this war. Also, we heard news and messages saying that Iran is going also to supply different types of missiles to Russia, which we definitely believe and know that Russia is going to use against us. So I'm just also would like to seize this opportunity to address my words to the Iranian government not to be involved in this brutal aggression against my country, because Iran used to be a very important trade and economic partner for Ukraine in the Middle East and Asia. So we believe that being a part of this aggression does not work for the interests of Iran. But if Iran doesn't stop its support to the Russian government and the Russian army in its aggression against my country, the consequences will be very, very devastating for our bilateral relations with this country.
But does it make any difference that Iran has denied all of these allegations against that?
Well, politically, Iran can deny that, but on the ground, we have gathered so many evidences that those drones are made in Iran, and Iran is supplying them in huge quantities for the interests of the Russian army. As I said, we urged the Iranian government to stop those supplies, but seems like unfortunately they do not care.
Interesting. So I'm just going to move back to the Ukraine side of the equation. An Amnesty International report in August said that the fighting tactics from Ukraine is endangering civilian lives by building military bases in residential areas around hospitals and the rest of them, and it violates international humanitarian laws. How is the Ukraine government reacting or addressing this concern?
Well, immediately after this report was published, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, he severely rebuffed this organization for being biased, because the Amnesty International had to do a very thorough investigation on the terms of the war. So Russia actually is using every possible way to endanger the Ukrainian population. So Russia using the civil facilities as shelters, and also they target our army from inside the cities. You know that since 2014 the Russian troops were present physically at the Donbass, and that was the reason why the Ukrainian army couldn't get in and was not able to liberate Donbass, because of the presence of the regular Russian army. The other point is that the Minsk agreements they envisaged that Ukraine had to organize a referendum on those territories, but many times we asked Russia to withdraw their troops from Donbass to enable the Ukrainian side to hold transparent and legal referendum over the Donbass. But the Russians never agreed. That was one of the reasons why they were intending to stay and to be present militarily in Donbass. That's why, in the light of the report of the Amnesty International that you've mentioned, We call upon Amnesty International and other organizations not to take biased stances and to investigate all the details from both sides of the war. And Ukraine is very transparent. Ukraine is ready to open all its facilities, in case it is necessary, to make sure that Ukraine has never developed any laboratories or has never established any military bases on its territory. And now we've entered the 8th month of the war. So has anyone seen any evidences of those military bases or the laboratories which the Russian side pretended to claim? I'm sure that it's not the case. That's why I'm sure that our army is defending our people. And when the Russian army entered and occupied the Ukrainian cities, no one met them with flowers or with open hearts and minds. Vice versa, the people were resisting and still resisting, because people do not want to be brought back again to the Soviet era, to the era of absence of freedom, absence of the right of speech. So we are a purely democratic country. Since the independence, we had 6 presidents, while Russia had only 2. So that's a bright example on how democratic is Ukraine and how Ukraine really follows the principles of democracy, the rule of law, and the human rights.
So you're categorically saying that Amnesty International is biased in its reports, even though you pointed out that, yes, indeed, Russia is committing war crimes, but that does not give or justify Ukraine, according to their reports, building or setting up military bases in residential areas. Is that what you're saying? And I think I also get the sense that you're saying that it's rather Russia who is setting up military bases in residential area and not Ukraine.
Russia is definitely doing that. The other point that I would like to add is that the chief of the Amnesty International office in Ukraine resigned immediately after this report was published. And the lady said that the report was published despite the objections of the Ukrainian office of Amnesty International. And there were no consultations made, and the office, which is in Ukraine, had no chance to be acquainted with the report. So the report was published without prior notice. And that was the reaction of the Ukrainian office of Amnesty International towards this biased report.
Interesting. One day the war will end. Are there post-war recovery and rebuilding plans in place? I mean, of course, the war is going to end very soon or someday. What are the plans to rebuild?
There are very concrete plans to rebuild Ukraine. We have a list already. We have a list of our international partners who are willing already to embark on different projects and program of post-war rebuilding of Ukraine. But we should not forget that Russia will be held responsible for the compensation of all the losses that it caused. So Russia will be paying for the damage in Ukraine. Along with that, of course, Ukraine is working with the international financial institutions together with donor countries to offer them concrete projects. And in fact, any country, despite wealthy or not, also is encouraged and welcome to participate, because some countries can just simply rebuild a small school or a kindergarten or a small hospital or whatever. By joint efforts of our friends across the world, we believe that we will be able to rebuild Ukraine very quickly, and Ukraine will be again prosperous and successful country which lives in peace and lives in harmony with all its neighbors.
Luhansk, Donetsk, Kherson and Zaporizhia were the newly annexed territories by Russia. What are the plans to recover these territories, bearing in mind Russia's threats that any attempt on this region is a direct attempt on Russia, and Putin says he would do everything to protect Russia's integrity?
Well, we don't see any other way just to liberate those territories, and also through political and diplomatic ways. So the more we get international support, the more the pressure will increase. The pressure on Russia will be increasing. And simply, we will never recognize the annexation or the loss of our territories, because if we do, that would mean the disintegration of the whole country. That's why I think no country in this world would accept to bargain on its sovereignty and territorial integrity. So we have 21% of our territories now under occupation and annexation. We will liberate them. We will fight until the last drop, until we regain those lands and territories. Of course, there is an option for Russians to withdraw and to stop this war. But seems like under this regime in Russia, they are not going to follow this path.
I mean, that brings me to a personal curiosity about the various sanctions, economic sanctions, and every other thing that has been put on Russia. Yet we see that Russia consistently continues to shell and attack Ukraine. Do you think that these sanctions are actually working, or could it be the case that Russia is not exactly affected by any of the sanctions?
We believe that the sanctions are needed, are required, and the sanctions had already played an important role in weakening the Russian military machine. Of course, they are not enough. The sanctions are not enough to stop this war, because the potential, the economic potential, military one, which Russia enjoys, is huge, is immense. But these sanctions have to be consistent, and they have to continue. And there are already 7 packages of international sanctions imposed on Russia and Russian economy. So we believe that only under these sanctions, the Russian economy will be getting more and more weak, and of course that in a way will help Ukraine to liberate its lands, and also will send a clear message to the Russian people, to the population of Russia, that Putin's regime is doing a wrong thing. And once they stop doing that, the sanctions will be lifted. And Russia is telling the world that the food scarcity and the food shortage in supplies in Africa has become a result of the sanctions. But it's simply not true, because the sanctions have never been imposed on exports of foodstuff or wheat or even fertilizers. So Russia was and is permitted and allowed to export anything from these goods. The real cause of the food insecurity in Africa and all other parts of the world was the blockade of the Ukrainian seaports. That's the message which I wish all countries, also including Africa, understand clearly.
Interesting. So you spoke about the sanctions not being enough. And the other question is, are they not enough, or they are ineffective?
I believe that they are effective enough, but there are some ways that Russia is able to skip those sanctions with the help of Russia's partners and close allies. So that's why we're addressing those countries and those parties not to help Russia avoid the sanctions. Once we agree on that, we will see a direct result and a very strong impact on Russia's economy, which will, as I said, lead to the weakening of the Russian war machine.
Interesting. Russia and Ukraine will always be neighbors. You literally live in each other's space, more or less. You speak almost the same language. People in Ukraine speak Russia, people in Russia speak Ukraine. Allies on both sides will most likely remain remote for the longest of times. At what point will Ukraine and Russia learn to coexist? I mean, for the longest of times, both countries have been at loggerheads, but they remain neighbors regardless. So at what point will both sides start to coexist peacefully?
I think the peaceful coexistence between Ukraine and Russia starts there, where Russia realizes and understands that Ukraine is a sovereign nation. Ukraine is a nation that deserves and has the right and will live independently, because we are not a part of Russia, and we've been a part of Russia only by force. We were forced to be a part of the Russian Empire through the history, but we always fought for our independence and for our sovereignty. We have our own language, we have our own culture, own history, own poets, philosophers. The ancient Rus Empire was established in Kiev. So the Kiev is the motherland of the old Rus cities, and because Christianity also spread throughout the Eastern Europe from Kiev. So that's why we have deep roots of our national statehood, which we don't want to give up. Ukraine now has been living the longest period of its independent history as an independent state since 1991. We've never been independent so long. We have never been as a nation so united as we are after the full-scale Russian aggression. So the people of Ukraine are very patriotic. At the same time, they're a very peaceful nation. We are a peaceful nation which believes in peaceful coexistence with everybody. And we never waged wars against anyone. But we will not let anyone deprive us from our history, from our roots, and our right to live independent.
Speak to me in very clear terms on what will be done about the expulsion clause for Nigerian students in Ukraine.
Well, I'm sure that my visit will contribute in sorting out this issue, and we are working hard on to meet the interests and to tackle the problems that Algerian students encounter currently. And the Ministry of Education is working thoroughly and very precisely on this issue, exactly pertaining to Nigerian students, because of the large number of those students who had to flee from Ukraine. Once again, I will add that we have a representative of the Ministry of Education here now in Abuja, and we will be meeting together tomorrow in the Ministry of Education, and the ways and options of facilitation will be provided directly to the Ministry of Education of Nigeria, which will